The warning alarm screamed through Luna Station at 0300 hours. Commander Jake Morrison rolled out of his bunk and grabbed his uniform, muscle memory from 20 years of military service taking over. He had been expecting another routine drill, but the urgency in the communications officer's voice over the intercom told him this was different. Commander Morrison to the bridge immediately. We have an unknown signal coming from deep space. Jake ran through the corridors of the station, his boots echoing off the metal walls. Luna Station served as humanity's first line of defense, monitoring the outer edges of the solar system for any threats. In the 3 years since the station became operational, they had detected nothing more exciting than asteroid debris and solar flares. The bridge buzzed with activity when Jake arrived. Lieutenant Sarah Kim stood at the communications console, her face pale with concentration. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission on multiple frequencies. It's definitely artificial, but the signal is unlike anything in our databases." "Play it," Jake ordered. The speakers crackled to life with a series of complex tones and patterns. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like music mixed with mathematical equations. Jake listened for several minutes, trying to make sense of the alien communication. "How long have we been receiving this?" he asked. "About 30 minutes, sir. The signal is repeating every 12 minutes. Our computers are working on translation, but it's going to take time." Jake nodded and activated the station's emergency protocols. Within minutes, every department head was gathered in the briefing room. The translation team worked frantically in the background, their computers processing the alien language through every linguistic model humanity had developed. Dr. Lisa Bennett, the station's senior xenobiologist, entered the room carrying a tablet full of preliminary analysis. She had been preparing for this moment her entire career, but the reality of first contact still made her hands shake slightly. "Commander, we're making progress on the translation. The signal contains mathematical concepts that seem universal. We think they're trying to establish communication protocols." "Any idea who they are or what they want?" Jake asked. "Not yet, but the signal is definitely a distress call. They're repeating coordinates and what appears to be some kind of urgent request." The next 6 hours passed in a blur of activity. The translation team worked around the clock, slowly piecing together the alien language. Jake found himself pacing the bridge, alternating between excitement and worry. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer, but the circumstances were far from ideal. "Commander, we have a breakthrough," Dr. Bennett announced. "The signal is from a species called the Zephyrian Collective. They're asking for help." Jake gathered around the main display as Dr. Bennett explained what they had learned. The Zephyrians represented a peaceful alliance of 3 different alien species. For over 20 years they had been fighting a losing war against something called the Vorthan Swarm. They described the swarm as a hive mind species that consumes everything in its path, Dr. Bennett continued. "The swarm converts organic matter into more soldiers, growing stronger with every world they conquer. The Zephyrians have been retreating, steadily losing system after system." "What do they want from us?" Jake asked. "Military assistance? They've heard rumors about a species called humans who might have the technology and capability to help them fight the swarm." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare, but they had never faced an enemy like this. The Zephyrians were describing a threat that could potentially spread to Earth if left unchecked. "We know anything about their military capabilities?" Jake asked. Dr. Bennett consulted her tablet. They described their approach as limited engagement and surgical strikes. They seemed to prefer diplomatic solutions and avoid large-scale conflicts. Their weapons appear to be designed for precision rather than destruction, and the swarm. Overwhelming numbers. They use wave tactics, throwing massive forces at their enemies until they break through. The Zephyrians estimate that the swarm has consumed over 40 worlds in the past 2 decades. Jake absorbed this information, his military mind already working through the implications. Zephyrians sounded like a civilized species that had never encountered total war. They were asking for help from humanity without understanding what that really meant. "Get me a direct link to Earth Command," Jake ordered. "We need to get this information to the Defense Council immediately." The transmission to Earth took several minutes to establish. Jake found himself standing in front of the communication array, about to deliver news that would change humanity forever. The weight of the moment pressed down on him as he began his report. Earth Command. This is Luna Station. They have confirmed first contact with an alien species. They are requesting military assistance against an extinction-level threat. The response from Earth was immediate and decisive. Within 12 hours, the Defense Council had reviewed all available information and reached a unanimous decision. Humanity would respond to the Zephyrian request for help, but as Jake watched the preliminary mobilization orders come through, he realized that the aliens had no idea what they had just unleashed. The Zephyrians were expecting a small relief. Force perhaps a few ships with advanced technology. Instead, humanity was preparing to send the largest military armada in human history. The orders were clear. Assemble the deep space fleet, prepare for extended combat operations, and treat the swarm as a threat to human civilization itself. The Zephyrians had asked for help, and humanity was going to give them exactly what they needed. Whether they understood it or not, Jake looked out through the observation deck at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, a peaceful species was fighting for survival against an enemy that showed no mercy. They had reached out to humanity in desperation, not knowing that they had just contacted the most successful predator species in the galaxy, the Zephyrians. We're about to learn that when humans go to war, they don't just fight to win. They fight to ensure that their enemies never threaten anyone again. The massive human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zephyrian territory with the force of a thunderclap. 58 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons and armor that the Zephyrians had never seen before. At the center of the fleet, the dreadnought U.S. Leviathan stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Bristling with enough firepower to level a moon, Admiral Sam Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his fleet took defensive positions around the outer colonies. He had commanded naval operations for 15 years, but this was the largest force ever assembled by humanity. Every ship in the fleet was crewed by volunteers who had fought to earn their place in the mission. The Zephyrian monitoring stations detected the fleet's arrival within minutes. Ambassador Veltar was in his private chambers when the alerts began sounding throughout the diplomatic compound. He rushed to the communication center, expecting to see the small relief force that his people had requested. What appeared on the tactical display made him stop breathing for several seconds. By the ancient lights, Veltar whispered. How many ships did they send? The junior officer manning the sensors stammered his response. Ambassador, we count 58 vessels. The largest one registers as bigger than our entire home defense fleet combined. Veltar activated the emergency communication protocols and sent a direct message to the human fleet. His hands shook as he composed the greeting, suddenly unsure whether his people had made a terrible mistake. Unknown human vessels. This is Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Collective. We welcome you to our space, and thank you for responding to our request for assistance. However, we must express our confusion about the size of your fleet. We had hoped for a small force to provide technical support. Admiral Carter received the message and smiled grimly. He activated the fleet communication system and responded directly to the alien ambassador. Ambassador Veltar, this is Admiral Sam Carter of the United Earth Fleet. You sent us a distress call describing an extinctional-level threat that has been consuming worlds for 20 years. This is how humans respond to extinctional-level threats. The blunt human response sent shockwaves. Through the Zephyrian command structure, Veltar quickly arranged for an emergency meeting between his military advisors and the human fleet commanders. Within hours, shuttles were moving between the alien stations and the massive human warships. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, the fleet's chief strategist, found herself sitting across from a group of Zephyrian military leaders who looked more like diplomats than soldiers. The aliens wore ceremonial robes instead of combat gear, and their discussion of military tactics sounded more like philosophical debate than war planning. Tell us about your enemy, Dr. Rodriguez said simply. General Kethfer, the senior Zephyrian. Commander began explaining the swarm's tactics using holographic displays. The aliens showed careful diagrams of enemy movements, detailed analysis of swarm breeding patterns, and complex mathematical models predicting future expansion routes. As you can see, Kethver concluded, we have been conducting strategic withdrawals to minimize casualties while evacuating civilian populations. Our goal is to preserve as many lives as possible while we search for a diplomatic solution. Dr. Rodriguez stared at the tactical displays in disbelief. The Zephyrians had been fighting a defensive war for 2 decades, always retreating, always trying to minimize their own losses. They treated warfare like a chess game, where the goal was to avoid losing pieces rather than winning the match. General, have you ever considered going on the offensive? She asked. The question seemed to confuse the Zephyrian officers. Kethver exchanged glances with his staff before responding. Dr. Rodriguez, we are a peaceful species, and we fight only when necessary to protect our people. Offensive warfare would make us no better than the swarm itself. The swarm doesn't care about your moral standards, Dr. Rodriguez replied. They're going to keep coming until you're all dead or converted. Sometimes the only way to protect innocent lives is to destroy those who threaten them. Meanwhile, Colonel Ryan Davis was conducting his own meetings with Zephyrian logistics officers. The aliens were fascinated by human military equipment, but their reactions ranged from amazement to horror as they learned about humanity's weapon systems. This device, one Zephyrian officer said, holding up a standard human plasma rifle, contains enough destructive power to level several city blocks. Why would individual soldiers need such weapons? Colonel Davis shrugged. Sometimes you need to level a city block. Better to have the capability and not need it than need it and not have it. The cultural differences became more apparent as the meetings continued. When the Zephyrians learned that human soldiers carried nuclear charges as standard equipment, several officers had to leave the room. The concept of weapons designed to destroy entire landscapes was completely foreign to their way of thinking. Your species fights wars as if the survival of your entire civilization depends on every battle, Ambassador Veltar observed during a formal dinner aboard the Leviathan. That's because it does, Admiral Carter replied. We learned long ago that enemies who want to destroy you won't be stopped by half measures. You fight with everything you have, or you lose everything you are. The Zephyrians began to realize that they had invited something far more dangerous than the swarm into their space. The humans didn't just have superior technology. They had a completely different understanding of what warfare meant. Captain Nicole Hayes, commander of the destroyer U.S. Hammer, was reviewing tactical data when she noticed something that made her laugh out loud. The Zephyrian battle reports showed casualty rates that human forces would consider negligible. Admiral, she reported, the Zephyrians retreat when they suffer losses that we would barely notice. Their entire military doctrine is built around avoiding combat casualties. That's why they're losing, Admiral Carter responded. It's fighting a war where they're not allowed to hurt the enemy badly enough to make them stop. As the human fleet prepared for combat operations, the Zephyrians watched in fascination and growing concern. Human soldiers moved through their preparations with an enthusiasm that the aliens found disturbing, instead of treating the upcoming battles as necessary evils. The humans seemed to view them as opportunities. Lieutenant Commander Gary Phillips dressed his bomber squadron with words that made the Zephyrian observers uncomfortable. Gentlemen, we've been training for this our entire careers. The enemy wants to wipe out an entire species, and they think nobody can stop them. Time to prove them wrong. The cheers that erupted from the human pilots sent chills through the alien witnesses. The Zephyrians had asked for help, but they were beginning to understand that they had summoned something that might be more terrifying than their enemies. Admiral Carter looked out at his fleet and felt a familiar surge of pride. Humanity had answered the call for help, and they would do what they always did when faced with an existential threat. They would fight with everything they had until the enemy was completely destroyed. The Zephyrians were about to learn what it meant to have Deathworlders as allies. The Kepler 442 system was dying. For 6 months, the Zephyrians had been conducting a careful retreat from their colony world, evacuating civilians while their fleet held a defensive line against the Vorthan swarm. the alien invaders had surrounded the planet with over 300 ships, methodically destroying everything that moved while they prepared for the final assault. Captain Nicole Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Hammer, watching the tactical display with growing excitement. The swarm fleet was positioned exactly as the Zephyrian reports had indicated. They formed a loose sphere around the planet, confident that their overwhelming numbers would crush any resistance. All ships, this is Admiral Carter. We're going to hit them hard and fast. No fancy maneuvering, no careful positioning. Punch straight through their center and keep going until they're all dead. The Zephyrian observers aboard the human ships felt their blood freeze. Admiral Carter was proposing a direct frontal assault against an enemy that outnumbered them 5-1. It was exactly the kind of reckless attack that had led to disaster for every other species that had tried to fight the swarm. Ambassador Veltar transmitted from his position aboard the Leviathan. Perhaps we should consider a more cautious approach. The swarm has destroyed every fleet that has tried direct confrontation. Ambassador, with respect. That's because nobody else fights like humans do. Watch and learn. The human fleet accelerated toward the swarm formation at maximum speed. Alien ships detected the incoming attack and began moving to intercept, their movements following the same predictable patterns they had used for decades. The swarm had never encountered an enemy that didn't retreat when faced with superior numbers, Captain. Hayes felt her heart racing as the distance closed. This was what she had trained for her entire career. The Hammer's crew moved with practiced efficiency, each officer knowing their role in the coming battle. The weapon systems hummed with power, ready to unleash destruction on a scale the swarm had never faced. All guns, target the biggest ship you can find, Hayes ordered. Remember, we're not trying to disable them, we're trying to kill them all.
Ow.
First human volleys struck the swarm formation like a hammer blow. Plasma beams and missile salvos tore through the alien ships, creating explosions that lit up the darkness of space. The swarm vessels, built for overwhelming weaker opponents, had never been designed to withstand the concentrated firepower of human warships, but the humans were just getting started. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Torres led the ground assault force toward the besieged colony. The planet's surface was covered with swarm ground forces that had been systematically destroying everything they could find. The Zephyrians had been hoping for a careful extraction of their remaining people, but Torres had different plans. Units were going in hot. Establish a perimeter around the colony center and start hunting these things down. Remember, they're not prisoners of war. They're pests, and we're the exterminators. The human dropships screamed through the atmosphere, their armor glowing from the heat of re-entry. Swarm anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, but the human pilots flew through it as if it were a minor inconvenience. They had trained for combat drops in conditions that would kill most other species. Torres hit the ground running, its powered armor absorbing impacts that would have shattered normal equipment. Swarm ground forces swarmed toward the human landing zone, expecting to overwhelm the small force with sheer numbers. They had no idea what they were facing. The human soldiers moved through the urban battlefield like they were born for it. Streets filled with debris and collapsed buildings provided perfect cover for their advance. They used the ruins of the colony as a tactical advantage, turning every corner into a potential ambush point. Contact front, Sergeant Bill Murphy called out as his squad encountered a group of swarm soldiers. The alien creatures were twice the size of humans with natural armor and razor-sharp claws. They had been designed by evolution to be perfect killing machines. The humans killed them in under 10 seconds. Murphy's squad moved through the engagement zone with practiced efficiency. They used covering fire, coordinated movement, and combined arms tactics that the swarm had never encountered. The alien creatures were individually dangerous, but they had no experience fighting an enemy that used teamwork and strategy. Back in space, the battle was reaching its climax. Commander Ashley Brooks piloted her destroyer U.S. Anvil directly into the heart of the swarm formation, her ship taking massive damage but creating an opening for the rest of the fleet. Anvil to all ships. I'm punching through their center line. Follow me in and finish them off. Brooks's destroyer was hemorrhaging atmosphere from dozens of hull breaches, but she kept flying. Her crew worked frantically to keep the ship functional while she maneuvered through the enemy formation. The Zephyrian observers watched in amazement as the human crew continued fighting, even as their ship was being destroyed around them. "Brooks, your ship is critically damaged," Admiral Carter transmitted. "Withdraw to a safe distance." "Negative, Admiral. We're still shooting, so we're still fighting." The Anvil's final attack run took out 3 swarm capital ships before the destroyer finally succumbed to its damage. Brooks and her crew ejected in escape pods, but not before ensuring that their sacrifice had maximum impact on the enemy. The sight of humans continuing to fight while their ship was exploding broke something in the swarm's tactical programming. They had never encountered a species that treated catastrophic damage as merely an inconvenience. The alien hive mind began to experience something it had never felt before: uncertainty. The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, the entire swarm fleet had been destroyed, and the colony world was back in Zephyrian hands. The human fleet had lost 6 ships and taken moderate damage to several others. By human standards, it had been a successful engagement. With acceptable casualties, by Zephyrian standards, it had been a demonstration of pure madness. Admiral Carter, Ambassador Veltar, transmitted from his position aboard the Leviathan. "Your forces have achieved total victory, but at a cost that we find ... disturbing. Your willingness to accept such heavy losses is beyond our understanding." "Ambassador, we didn't lose those ships. We spent them." "There's a difference. Every human who died today knew they were trading their life for the survival of your people. That's not a loss. It's a victory." The Zephyrians struggled to understand the human concept of acceptable losses. To them, every death was a tragedy to be avoided. To the humans, death in combat was simply another tool to be used when necessary, as the human fleet prepared to move to the next battle zone. The Zephyrians realized that they had allied themselves with a species that didn't just fight wars. They excelled at them with an enthusiasm that was both inspiring and terrifying. The swarm had finally encountered an enemy that refused to be intimidated by superior numbers or accept defeat as inevitable. For the first time in decades, the alien invaders were learning what it felt like to be prey. Dr. Maria Rodriguez stood before a group of fascinated and terrified Zephyrian scientists in the main briefing room of the Leviathan. The aliens had requested detailed information about human biology and culture, hoping to understand their new allies better. What they were learning made them question whether asking for humanity's help had been wise. "Your planet is classified as what we call a Class 12 death world," Dr. Rodriguez explained, displaying holographic images of Earth on the main screen. "Most species in the galaxy would consider it completely uninhabitable." The Zephyrian scientists leaned forward, studying the images with growing alarm. Earth's violent weather systems, active volcanism, and extreme temperature variations looked like a vision of hell to creatures who had evolved on peaceful, stable worlds. "The gravity on your world is nearly twice what we consider normal, Doctor," Kethis, the lead Zephyrian scientist, observed. "How do your people survive under such crushing conditions?" "We don't just survive," Dr. Rodriguez replied with a smile. "We thrive. High gravity made us stronger. Dangerous weather taught us to adapt quickly. Predators that could kill us easily forced us to become smarter and work together." The holographic display shifted to show Earth's wildlife. The Zephyrians gasped as they saw images of tigers, sharks, bears, and venomous snakes. These creatures were larger and more dangerous than anything that existed on Zephyrian worlds. "These animals share your planet?" Dr. Kethis asked in disbelief. "We used to hunt them for food," Dr. Rodriguez said casually. "Now we mostly leave them alone, but some humans still hunt them for sport." The concept of deliberately seeking out dangerous predators for entertainment was so alien to the Zephyrians that several of them had to sit down. Their own worlds had been carefully managed to eliminate most dangerous species centuries ago. Major Kevin Stone entered the briefing room carrying a tablet full of video files. He'd been assigned to cultural exchange duties, sharing information about human society with their alien allies. The videos he was about to show would complete the Zephyrians' education about humanity. "Dr. Rodriguez has been telling you about our world," Major Stone said. "Now let me show you what we do for fun." The first video showed humans engaged in extreme sports. The Zephyrians watched in horror as people jumped off cliffs with only fabric wings, threw themselves off bridges attached to elastic cords, and deliberately rode down mountains on thin boards at dangerous speeds. "This is recreational activity?" Dr. Kethis asked weakly. "We call them extreme sports," Major Stone explained. "Humans actively seek out dangerous situations because we enjoy the challenge. The more dangerous it is, the more fun we have." The next series of videos showed human military training. The aliens watched as soldiers crawled through mud under live gunfire, jumped out of perfectly good aircraft, and practiced combat in conditions that would kill most other species. What disturbed the Zephyrians most was that the humans were clearly enjoying themselves. "Your soldiers volunteer for this treatment?" Ambassador Veltar asked. "They compete for the chance to do it," Major Stone replied. "We have more volunteers for dangerous assignments than we can use." Humans consider combat to be the ultimate test of their abilities. Commander Patricia Lee was working in the ship's engineering section when she received reports about swarm weapon systems. Within hours, she had completely redesigned human plasma rifles to be more effective against swarm biology. The modifications would have taken Zephyrian engineers months to develop. "How did you accomplish this so quickly?" The Zephyrian engineer Velkdar asked as he examined the modified weapons. "Rapid adaptation is a basic survival skill for humans," Commander Lee explained. "On our world, the environment changes constantly. Species that can't adapt quickly die out. We've been practicing this for millions of years." The Zephyrians were beginning to understand that humans didn't just tolerate change and danger. They had evolved to excel in chaotic, threatening environments. What other species considered extreme emergencies, humans treated as normal operating conditions. The most disturbing revelation came during a conversation between General Chris Murphy and the Zephyrian military leadership. The alien officers were trying to understand why human soldiers seemed so eager for combat. General Murphy, Commander Kethver asked carefully, "Your troops appear to be enjoying this war. We find this attitude difficult to understand." Leaned back in his chair and considered the question. "Commander, humans have been fighting wars for our entire history. It's what we're good at. We've spent the last 50 years without a major conflict, and frankly, it's been boring. Of our people joined the military, hoping they'd get a chance to test themselves in real combat. You consider war to be entertainment?" Kethver asked in shock. "Not entertainment," Murphy replied. "Fulfillment. Humans are pack hunters who evolved to face impossible odds and win anyway. This war against the swarm is exactly the kind of challenge we were designed for." Zephyrian struggled to process this information. Her own species viewed warfare as a tragic necessity, something to be avoided whenever possible. The idea that another intelligent species could actively enjoy large-scale combat was almost incomprehensible. Dr. Rodriguez continued her cultural presentations, explaining human bonding behavior to increasingly nervous alien observers. She showed how human soldiers formed intense loyalty bonds with their units and extended those bonds to include allies and civilians they had never met. When humans classify someone as part of their pack, they will risk their lives to protect them, she explained. This instinct doesn't distinguish between humans and non-humans. Your people are now part of our pack, which means we will fight to the death to keep you safe. The pack bonding explanation helped the Zephyrians understand why human soldiers had thrown themselves into combat so recklessly to save alien civilians. It wasn't duty or orders driving them, it was instinct as deep as their genetic code. Captain Steve Morgan arrived at the briefing with combat footage from the recent battle. The video showed human ground forces moving through urban combat zones, with casual competence, treating environments that would terrify other species as familiar territory. Urban warfare is actually easier for us than open field combat, Captain Morgan explained. Humans evolved in complex environments with lots of cover. Cities and ruins feel like home to us. The Zephyrians watched as human soldiers used destroyed buildings, debris fields, and damaged infrastructure as tactical advantages. The aliens realized that what they considered to be disaster zones, humans viewed as ideal fighting terrain. As the cultural exchange sessions continued, the Zephyrians came to a disturbing conclusion. They hadn't just allied themselves with a technologically advanced species. They had invited apex predators into their space. Humans were friendly and protective toward their allies, but they were also the most dangerous species the aliens had ever encountered. Ambassador Veltar, Dr. Rodriguez said as the session ended, "I want you to understand something important. Humans don't fight wars to win territory or resources. We fight wars to completely eliminate threats to our pack. The swarm made the mistake of threatening people we've decided to protect. Won't stop until every single one of them's dead." Finality in her voice sent chills through the Zephyrian observers. They had asked for help against an extinction-level threat, and they had received it. But they were beginning to realize that their saviors might be more terrifying than their enemies. The humans were Deathworlders who treated the impossible as merely difficult, and the difficult as routine. They had evolved to thrive in conditions that would kill other species, and they brought that same relentless adaptability to everything they did. The Zephyrians had summoned humanity to save them from monsters. Now they wondered if they had simply traded one set of monsters for another, friendlier set that happened to be on their side. The Vorthan swarm's home cluster stretched across 7 star systems, each one containing multiple hive worlds that had pumped out billions of warriors for over a century. The massive interconnected network of planets represented the heart of swarm civilization, a fortress that no enemy had ever successfully attacked. Admiral Sam Carter stood before the holographic display showing the target systems. His senior officers gathered around the war table. The final assault would require splitting the human fleet into 7 separate strike groups, each one tasked with completely destroying an entire star system. "Gentlemen, this is what we came here to do," Admiral Carter announced. "We're going to hit all 7 systems simultaneously. Total destruction. No survivors, no retreat. The swarm ends today." The Zephyrian observers in the briefing room felt their blood freeze. The humans were proposing to divide their already outnumbered fleet and attack the most heavily defended target in swarm space. It was a plan that guaranteed massive casualties and offered only a slim chance of success. Admiral Ambassador Veltar interjected, "Perhaps we should consider a siege approach. Contain the swarm in their home systems and starve them out over time." Ambassador, with respect, we didn't come this far to contain them. We came to kill them all. Sieges give the enemy time to adapt and prepare. Fast, violent action gives them time to die. Captain Steve Morgan received command of Strike Group Alpha, tasked with assaulting the primary hive world where the swarm's central intelligence was located. His force consisted of 8 destroyers and 2 heavy cruisers, facing a system defended by over 400 enemy ships. "All ships, this is Morgan. We're going in fast, and we're going in hard. Remember, this isn't about survival. It's about making sure the swarm never threatens anyone again." Human strike groups jumped into hyperspace simultaneously, beginning the final phase of the war. Each group knew they were facing impossible odds, but that only made the humans more determined. They had been bred for this kind of fight. Strike Group Alpha dropped out of hyperspace directly in the center of the swarm home system. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of swarm ships converged on the small human force, confident that sheer numbers would crush the invaders. Captain Morgan watched his tactical display fill with enemy contacts and smiled grimly. This was exactly the kind of hopeless situation that brought out the best in human warriors. All ships, ramming speed, are going to punch straight through to the hive world. Anyone who can't keep up, use your self-destruct charges to take as many of them with you as possible. The UES Titan, Morgan's flagship, accelerated toward the hive world with its weapons blazing. Enemy fire hammered the ship's shields, but Morgan kept flying straight into the heart of the swarm formation. His crew worked frantically to keep the ship functional while taking damage that would have destroyed most other vessels. "Captain, we've lost main engines, and weapons are down to 30%, his tactical officer reported. "Then we'll use what we have left," Morgan replied calmly. "Set collision course for the largest hive structure on the planet. If we can't shoot them, we'll ram them." The ground assault was led by Colonel Amy Foster, whose troops had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. The hive world's surface was covered with swarm defensive positions and millions of warrior drones. The humans would be outnumbered 1,000 to 1. "All units, remember what we're fighting for? Foster announced as the dropships screamed toward the planet's surface. These things have been murdering innocent people for decades. Today, we make them pay for every life they've taken. The human soldiers hit the ground in the middle of the largest hive complex, immediately surrounded by enemy forces. But instead of being overwhelmed, they began systematically hunting through the underground tunnels with a combination of high-tech weapons and brutal close-quarters combat. Foster led her troops through the twisting passages of the hive, using demolition charges to collapse tunnels behind them and cutting off swarm reinforcements. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could switch between advanced technological warfare and primitive tunnel fighting. Contact front, multiple hostiles. Sergeant Mike Taylor called out as his squad encountered a group of swarm warriors. In a narrow corridor, alien creatures were designed for close combat. With natural armor and razor-sharp claws, the humans killed them with combat knives and hand grenades. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Gary Phillips was leading a desperate mission to reach the swarm's central hive mind. Intelligence reports indicated that destroying the central intelligence would shut down the entire swarm network across the galaxy. Phillips to all units, I'm taking my team directly to the core. If we don't make it out, blow the whole complex and call it a day. Phillips and his 12 volunteers fought their way through corridors filled with swarm warriors, leaving a trail of alien corpses behind them. The mission was supposed to be surgical and precise, but the humans had turned it into a rampage of destruction. The central hive mind was located in a massive chamber, deep underground, surrounded by thousands of swarm defenders. Phillips looked at the impossible odds and started laughing. Boys, we came here to do a job. Let's get it done. The final assault lasted less than 10 minutes. Phillips and his team fought through the swarm defenses using every weapon they carried, including their bare hands when ammunition ran out. The last transmission from the team was Phillips. Repo, mission success, just before the explosions began. The destruction of the central hive mind sent shockwaves through the entire swarm network. Across 7 star systems, swarm forces suddenly stopped coordinating their attacks. The alien warriors, cut off from their guiding intelligence, began fighting each other instead of the human invaders. Admiral Carter watched the tactical displays as reports came in from all strike groups. The simultaneous assault had worked. Every swarm hive world was either destroyed or in the process of being evacuated by the collapsing alien forces. All ships, this is Admiral Carter. Mission accomplished. The swarm is finished. The cost had been enormous by Zephyrian standards. Humanity had lost nearly half their fleet and thousands of soldiers. But by human standards, it had been a complete victory achieved at acceptable cost. In the aftermath, the Zephyrian Collective offered humanity full membership in their federation. But the relationship had fundamentally changed. The aliens now understood that they had allied themselves with apex predators who treated extinctional-level threats as interesting challenges. Ambassador Veltar found himself writing a report to the Galactic Council. That would change how the galaxy viewed both humanity and warfare itself. The species known as humans has successfully eliminated the Vorthan swarm threat through methods that can only be described as total war. They fight not just to win, but to ensure their enemies can never threaten anyone again, while they are loyal allies and protectors of innocent life. Their approach to conflict is unlike anything we have previously encountered. The report concluded with a warning that would echo through galactic politics for generations. Humanity represents a new type of civilization. They are simultaneously our greatest protection and our greatest concern. They will absolutely ensure the survival of their allies, but they will do so using methods that may fundamentally change our understanding of what survival requires. Human colonists began arriving on former swarm worlds within months, ready to establish settlements on planets that other species considered too dangerous to inhabit. The Zephyrians watched in amazement as humans not only survived, but thrived in environments that would kill most other species. The galaxy had learned that when civilized species faced extinction, they could call on humanity for help. But they had also learned that humans didn't just solve problems. They eliminated them so completely that they could never arise again. The swarm was gone forever. The galaxy was a safer place. But everyone now knew that the greatest predators in the universe were on their side, at least as long as they remained friends with the Deathworlders from Earth.